Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to welcome you to my presentation. My name is Sebastian Bleschke and I'm Managing Director of INES, which is the German Association of Gas Storage System Operators. It's worth saying that INES members represent over 90% of German gas storage capacities and therefore account for more than 25% of gas storage capacities in the EU. I think it's fair to assume that the topic of my presentation will not be much of a surprise to you. I will be talking about gas infrastructures. To be more precise, I will be talking about hydrogen networks, but I will also take a step back and have a look at the gas system and especially gas infrastructures as a whole. My main goal is to talk about the question, how can we manage the infrastructure transition? For a long period of time, people have been talking about the energy transition, but what they really meant was an electricity transition. We are now at a point where we try to extend the electricity transition by a transport and heating transition. However, we as INES are convinced that there is a need for an infrastructure transition as well to complete the energy transition. In order to achieve the infrastructure transition, we think that we have to put some measures in place. So in the first part of my speech, I will present our ideas on how to regulate hydrogen networks. And against that background, I will also speak about the regulatory framework for the gas sector in general. In the second part, we will look together at the bigger picture that lies behind the infrastructure transition, namely the energy transition. So let's have a look at the first issue, regulating hydrogen networks. INES has suggested to take an adaptive regulatory approach. The German National Regulatory Authority, better known as German Federal Network Agency, invited the market to take part in a consultation and released a paper of almost 100 pages on this topic. At INES, we have undertaken a profound analysis of the paper and thereafter developed our position. The German NRA defined three mutually exclusive scenarios for the development of the hydrogen market in Germany. However, we believe that the defined scenarios will all be run through by the hydrogen markets at a certain point. And you can see these phases on this slide. We believe that regulators should take an adaptive approach that follows market development step by step. So let's look at the phase one. This is mainly a status quo description. Several stakeholders have suggested that we needed a fully regulated hydrogen network immediately as to trigger market development. However, hydrogen networks do already exist. In Germany, that is in the form of 3 industrial clusters. So there is a hydrogen demand that is fulfilled by hydrogen producers which operate hydrogen networks in a market-driven environment. And that means hydrogen networks can, of course, develop without a specific regulatory framework. The 3 industrial clusters can be described by a relatively small number of consumers and producers that coexist in a balanced market. But from the point of view of a balanced market, and that is something the German NRA has argued for, there is no reason to take on specific regulation. Therefore, our suggestion is to take on no regulation, meaning neither access nor tariff regulation, especially at this point of market development. Now, of course, we will see new market participants entering the hydrogen market. And if their access to hydrogen networks is not guaranteed free from discrimination, then there is a way to solve this issue by adapting general restriction of competition law. That is very important to mention because transport system operators are already obligated in Germany by paragraph 19 of the Restriction of Competition Act to ensure non-discriminatory access to networks that are organized in a free market. So now, how do we believe the hydrogen market will develop? And this is phase 2. We think that, first of all, there will be an increase of production that will supply the existing industry clusters. Obviously, there will have to be new pipelines that connect production facilities to customers. And this corresponds with the second scenario of the German NRA. At this point of market development, we will have to assume that supply exceeds demand. Quite often people say there is an increased demand in the future. However, it is much more likely that subsidies will trigger a technology push. After all, if there was a market pull from consumers that led to price levels at which producers were willing to produce green hydrogen, we wouldn't be in need of subsidiary instruments. So we will see new hydrogen production facilities be brought into the market by these instruments. And as the existing supply will not vanish all of a sudden, we will have a supply surplus that leads to a market where supply exceeds demand. As consumers will then have the power to choose from a supply surplus, producers will end up in a very competitive environment. And a situation like this involves the danger that vertically integrated companies that on the one hand produce hydrogen, but on the other hand operate hydrogen pipelines as well, would exclude other suppliers from pipeline access. As such, it is important to introduce specific competition law at this stage, namely access regulation. By the way, transport pipelines are usually not developed overnight, so there will be planning and construction phases. Therefore, we can assume that we will reach the aforementioned market development roughly in 2025. The third phase of market development can be characterized as the third scenario of the German NRAs. We will have even more transport routes that will lead to an increased integration of industrial clusters. And finally, to comprehensive pipeline infrastructure across the country. With that said, we will lose competition among different clusters. What do I mean by competition among clusters? If a consumer enters hydrogen markets, he will, as long as there are 3 different industrial clusters, have a choice of location. This choice triggers competition among clusters, and this competition has an effect on global supply chains, and so also on grid levels. However, if we lose this competition, we won't have competitive constraints on network tariffs anymore. That is why we believe that regulating network tariffs will have to complement access regulation at this point, but not before. The German NRA also suggests that it will be advantages for the regulatory framework to complement access and tariff regulation by unbundling. If this truly facilitates regulatory affairs, we believe that access and tariff regulation should be enhanced by unbundling. All in all, we believe that the adaptive regulatory approach suggested will lead to an infrastructure development that is much more in line with actual market developments, much more than the current regulatory framework for natural gas would allow. Well, in fact, that's a good link to the next topic. So let's have a closer look at the existing regulatory framework for gas pipelines. Here I want to emphasize why it makes sense to choose a different approach approach for hydrogen markets. At first, it is important to recall that TSOs connect their pipelines in Germany in two different market areas at the moment. Regulation-wise, two aspects are key for the pipelines. First, network utilization is not sufficiently considered in the regulation at the moment. Why is that? In the gas system, this situation is caused mainly by the fact that network tariffs do not produce any steering effects at all. At the moment, the postage stamp tariffication methodology is used in Germany. That means everyone pays for their postage stamp, no matter where their letter is sent. Transferred to the gas sector, customers have gas sent wherever they want it sent. And as a consequence, everyone pays just the same stamp, no matter if they actually add or reduce loads for the network. But there's a second issue on the level of incentive regulation. At the moment, maybe driven by electricity market developments, the regulatory framework focuses very much on expanding networks. The regulatory incentives work in a relatively simple way. Assume I'm a TSO and as a private company, I'm interested in maximizing profits. Then I have, given the current incentive regulation, mainly one option to do that, namely to invest in networks. This way I will increase my asset base, and by this I will increase capital in the balance sheet extension. And on this capital, the regulatory framework guarantees a very solid interest. So in the end, I will maximize my profits mainly by expanding networks. Obviously, this approach leaves out market-based flexibility that I could use to reduce network expansion. But these are only operational expenditures that do not increase capital. Instead, they are profit and loss accounts that may only recoup if I operate at 100% efficiency. In short, this option is less profitable for a TSO than expanding networks. Now, as the chance would have it, and you can see this as a phase 2 on this slide, we are currently undergoing a process of market area integration in Germany. And this process forces us to take market-based flexibilities into account, as there is no time to develop new networks until October 2021. And I'm absolutely sure that we would not have had such an intensive discussion on market-based instruments if we weren't looking at such a short period of time to complete market area integration. That means we will make use of market-based instruments to compensate the loss of capacities in the gas markets in Germany. It is very interesting to see that in a medium scenario we talk about costs of 6 million euros for implementing market-based instruments in order to compensate the loss of 80% of conditionally firm entry capacities. It is even more interesting when we compare these costs with average running costs of a compressor. German TSOs have made this comparison in their network development plan and have come to the conclusion that running, not even investing in, only one compressor is more expensive than the entire utilization of market-based instruments. Having said that, it must be allowed to ask the question if mistakes were made in regulating gas networks in the past, focusing mainly on network expansion. Of course, we will still have these mistakes in the regulatory design of phase 2, and that's why we call for further developments in phase 3. We believe that we need network tariffs that will optimize network utilization by allocating network costs as they are actually produced. Only at this stage, network users will reflect on better network utilization, and will start to make extended use of existing infrastructure. We believe this development would also be an effective approach for electricity networks. Moreover, incentive regulation should focus more on utilizing existing infrastructure. If this would be the case, we would also realize higher incentives to deploy market-based instruments, which should not be reduced to market area integration, but should generally optimize network expansion. So all in all, combining these optimizing and adaptive regulatory steps, we would deploy an infrastructure that is much more in line with market developments and integrates flexibilities more effectively. Why do we believe that it is key to master the infrastructure transition as suggested? Well, it's as simple as this. With the infrastructure transition, and thereby I mean most of all a different regulatory approach, the gas system must become a flexibility provider. When the infrastructure transition succeeds, the gas system will become a flexibility provider to all sectors. Gas-fired power plants and power-to-gas facilities will provide flexibility or flexible entries and exits to the electricity system. We will see flexibility provided to the heating sector through gas-based heating systems. We will have gas fuels as flexibility option in the transportation sector. And of course, we can also flexibly supply industrial processes, be it energy or feedstock. Why is this flexibility so important? Well, let's have a look at some figures. In 2017, ENIS and the German Wind Energy Association, VWE, have taken a closer look at how much flexibility is needed to lead the German energy transition to success. In particular, we analyzed how much flexibility will have to be provided by gas storage facilities. And on this slide, you see the result in two different scenarios. The scenarios, by the way, only differ by the usage of gas in the heating sector, while the optimized system scenario takes an approach where parts of the heating sector are also provided on a gas basis. The scenario maximum electrification only includes electricity-based heating, such as heat pumps. And I think it's worth noting that the gas storage flexibility demand does not really differ between both scenarios. And the explanation is as simple as it comes. If heating is based mainly on heat pumps, and high loads occur on cold days in winter, temperature differentials of heat pumps drop at the same time. And this means that they need huge amounts of electricity to operate. In times of no sun or wind, however, electricity cannot be provided by renewables, but has to be produced conventionally by gas-fired power plants. In a carbon-neutral system in 2050, gas-fired power plants will have to run on green gases, meaning that these gases will also not be able to be produced just in time by power-to-gas facilities, as the electricity needed for this process was already missing before. This means we will need significant gas storage capacity. What adds to this situation is the loss of efficiency in gas-fired power plants, which will need an even higher performance of gas storage facilities, as we would see if gas was not only utilized in power plants, but also in the heating sector directly via gas-based heating systems, like in the scenario optimized system. Moreover, one of our basic premises was a gas mixture of 10% hydrogen and 90% methane. If you know the calorific value of hydrogen, you will probably know that for the same energy energetic value, you will need much larger working gas volumes. So if we are to extend the share of hydrogen in the system, we will also need significantly larger working gas volumes in gas storage for the same amount of energy. And this would lead to an even higher gas storage demand to provide necessary flexibilities for the system. So all in all, we can conclude that the energy transition needs flexibility. And flexibility, especially provided by the gas system, must be the key focus of the infrastructure transition. Having said that, we believe that the energy transition needs the infrastructure transition. That means we will have to think methane networks, hydrogen networks, and gas storage facilities in an integrated manner. And we will have to put more emphasis on flexibility as to ensure that the gas system, together with the renewable electricity system, will complete the energy transition in all sectors. Thank you very much.